you're very welcome to the final webinar in our series on supporting the well-being of young people. Just to remind you that the reason we're running these webinars is because of a study we launched recently looking at both parents and young people's mental health literacy. And we're still looking for parents and particularly fathers to complete the study, and also young people. So if there's any fathers in the audience, or if you can encourage your young people to participate, we would really appreciate it. So tonight I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ciara Mahon. Ciara is a post-doctoral research fellow in the Youth Mental Health Lab at University College Dublin. She's currently working with Professor Barbara Dooley and Associate Professor Amanda Fitzgerald to investigate the factors influencing the mental health of 20,000 youth who completed the My World Survey 2, which is a national study of youth mental health. Ciara's PhD evaluated the effectiveness of compassion-focused approaches to address body dissatisfaction associated with social media use in adolescents. And this evening, she'll be discussing the principles of these compassion-focused approaches and how they can help parents and teachers to support young people. So I'll hand you over to Ciara to begin.
Thanks, Veronia. I'm just going to share my screen. Apologies, I'm just trying to change the monitor on the screen. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Ciara Mahon. I am a postdoctoral researcher in the Youth Mental Health Lab here at UCD, and it's a privilege for me to be here tonight to discuss compassion approaches for supporting young people. As Veronia mentioned, my PhD focused on compassion approaches and the effectiveness of self-compassion for supporting mental health of adolescents, particularly in the area of body image and social media. And self-compassion is a topic that I have found personally relevant and useful. And so I'm excited to share some of the principles of self-compassion tonight with you. And hopefully you'll find something useful or of relevance for supporting your own mental health and that of your young person. So tonight I'm going to be talking about what self-compassion is, how does it work? I'm going to be talking to you about how to build some capacities of self-compassion and how to use some of these principles to support your young person. But before I get into that, I want to set a background for tonight's talk. I'm currently working on the My World Survey 2, which was a national survey of youth mental health. And this was conducted by the Youth Mental Health Lab at UCD in conjunction with Jigsaw, which is the National Centre for Youth Mental Health. And so this was a survey that involved almost 20,000 Irish young people and sought to assess the factors that were influencing their mental health. And what this study found was that approximately 40% of Irish adolescents aged 13 to 18 years were scoring outside the normal range of depression. So this means that about 60% were scoring in the ranges from mild to very severe levels of depression. And the study found that these levels of depression were higher at older ages of adolescence, so those in the senior cycle typically scored higher. And similarly, 49% of Irish adolescents scored outside the normal ranges of anxiety. So this suggests to us that mental health and mental distress and mental health difficulties are quite prevalent and common among our young people. And this underscores the importance of trying to identify factors to promote mental health among this group. And a key finding from this research was that having one good adult, whether this be one good teacher, one good parent, one good coach or sports coach or mentor, having one good adult that was there to listen to a young person and support them in times of difficulty and distress was found to be a protective factor for youth mental health. And so the fact that you as a parent or a teacher is tuning in tonight to identify ways to further support your young person, to me is a sign that you're contributing as a protective factor for your young person's mental health. And that's a very positive thing. So the question might arise, why might these levels of depression and anxiety among our young people be so high? And we can look to the context and the environment in which we're surrounded with to provide partial explanation for why this might be the case. So for students, there's a huge pressure on them to perform well academically, to maintain and keep up with all their social relationships and to excel at all their extracurricular activities. So it's a pressurizing time for them. It's also pressurizing time for teachers too, to ensure that their students get the high grades, and then having that increased pastoral responsibility, particularly trying to look out for young people's mental health. And also for parents too, it is a challenging time. Again, parents are seeking to provide their children with all the opportunities that they can, carting them around to all the activities that they're involved in, and doing this while trying to manage work and home life. And again, it's a pressurizing context for everyone. And on top of this, we have the coronavirus overlaying on this. And again, this has been a particularly difficult time for many people in terms of mental health, and particularly for young people. Again, it's disrupted their social and educational lives and has been a particularly challenging time. So adding to these challenges. So in sum, we can live in a complicated and often pressurized world. And so compassion is an approach that seeks to help us manage these life's challenges and stresses. And the aim of my talk tonight is to introduce you to a compassion framework to help you support your young person and yourself. So compassion is a concept that has been around for a very long time. It originated in kind of Eastern psychology or Buddhist philosophy and has been recently co-opted in more Western psychology approaches. And it's defined as a sensitivity to the suffering of others and a motivation to alleviate it. So within this, the definition is twofold. It's the ability to recognize when somebody else is in distress and having a knowledge and an awareness and an ability to alleviate this distress. Then self-compassion is this compassion turned inwards. So it's a sensitivity to one's own suffering and a desire to alleviate it. And Kristen Neff further decomposes self-compassion into three kind of concepts. And these include self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. And I'm going to describe each of these in turn. So self-kindness involves treating yourself with the same kindness which you treat others. And this is particularly important in times of difficulty and distress. So our tendency often when we're struggling and we feel like we failed or made a mistake is to be critical, to be intolerant of our mistakes and to self-condemn ourselves. So self-compassion involves treating ourselves with empathy, non-judgment and understanding in these difficult times, or when we find ourselves in these difficult times. Then we have mindfulness. So this is the ability to hold our experiences in a balanced awareness rather than ignoring or exaggerating the pain. So typically when we're experiencing difficult times or failures or stress, our minds can often exaggerate and distort our thoughts and feelings. We can also often over-identify with emotions. And sometimes we get so wrapped up, we're completely involved in the emotions, it's difficult for us to think rationally. So mindfulness affords us the ability to step back, view our experience within a broader context, and allows us to respond rather than react to a situation. So maybe to think things out and identify more helpful steps for us to move through our difficulties. And finally, common humanity. So this is the recognition that all humans are fallible. So we all make mistakes, we all experience loss and suffering. And our tendency is when we experience suffering, so shame and criticism, we often tend to feel isolated and disconnected from others. And the irony is this is kind of what connects us. So we are connected by our suffering. And so common humanity involves recognizing that you are not alone when you feel like you're suffering. And also it involves that recognition that failure is an inevitable part of our human experience, and to view it as something that could be a learning opportunity and something that can help us grow. So self-compassion often gets bad PR. It's often a very misunderstood concept. And so I want to address what self-compassion is not. And it's not candles and scented candles and bath bombs. And it's not always about just being nice. So a compassionate parent is a parent that doesn't allow their child to stay up even though they protest. So it's not kind of yielding to every whim. And it's not letting oneself off the hook or a soft, fluffy option or a sign of weakness. It requires a lot of strength and courage to address difficult and challenging thoughts and feelings. So self-compassion does require an element of strength. And sometimes self-compassion is misconstrued as being selfish or self-pitying, but actually having self-compassion for oneself allows you to be there more for another person. So in essence, it's more of a selfless than a selfish act. So self-compassionate qualities include having strength, courage, commitment, and wisdom. And I want to tap into these in a little more detail. So as I mentioned, compassion takes courage. As I said, it involves dealing with difficult situations. And sometimes we have to deal with situations or experiences that might be uncomfortable or challenging or difficult for us. And a common theme of the talks that have preceded this one, there's a common theme around fears that parents or teachers have about broaching difficult or sensitive topics with their young person, and fears of discussing their concerns. So fears around, what if I say the wrong thing, or what if I make things worse? And so it takes compassion and it takes a lot of courage to try and encounter, or kind of address, try and alleviate the suffering that your young person might be experiencing, even though it might be something that is fear-inducing or uncomfortable for you. So compassion does take courage. So why do we need self-compassion? So self-compassion is a really great and important resource that can help us manage hardship in times of adversity. It can help build coping skills and resilience and help us regulate our emotions. It can help develop feelings of contentness, connectedness, and warmth. And these feelings can help buffer against more negative emotions. And it helps us to be more accepting of our thoughts and more creative with our problem solving. There's a growing body of evidence linking self-compassion to increased life satisfaction, self-esteem, confidence, family function, even improved immune functioning. And it's also associated with reduced levels of depression, anxiety, rumination, and self-criticism. In the context of tonight's talk, practicing self-compassion has been found to reduce parental stress. And also it's been found that adolescents who have parents who report less self-blame tend to have fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety. So what this suggests is that self-compassion is not only the capacity to improve parental mental health, but also as a byproduct, young people's mental health. And there's also preliminary evidence to suggest that compassion-focused approaches in schools offer the potential to improve well-being among staff and students. So what does compassion look like? And tonight I'm going to talk to you about a particular approach, compassionate mind training. So there are a range of different approaches, compassion approaches, and this is just one of them, but this is probably one of the most well-known ones and most popularly used. Those clinicians of you that are out there would probably know this as compassion-focused therapy. So basically, compassion-focused therapy is applying the principles of compassionate mind training in a therapeutic context. So tonight, I'm just going to be talking about those principles of compassionate mind training. So compassionate mind training is a psychotherapeutical approach that was developed by psychologist Paul Gilbert. And it was designed to address shame and self-criticism, which are considered core features of psychological distress. And the aim of compassion mind training is to improve emotional regulation and coping skills and help people find ways to relate to oneself in more helpful ways. The overarching aim of compassionate mind training is to adopt a compassionate mindset or self. And so compassion mind training draws on a range of different psychological theories and approaches, and including evolutionary psychology, neurobiology, developmental psychology, and cognitive behavior therapy. And it kind of uses psychoeducation, so informs us about how our brains work and how our minds work by drawing on the principles of these various fields of psychology. And it also incorporates mindfulness practices, which are designed to address emotional regulation and try and help us regulate activities in our mind. And so the key of self-compassion and a core tenet of this approach is that understanding why we behave, think, and feel the way we do helps us to understand ourselves more and helps us to reduce self-blame. And so this kind of approach draws heavily on evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology to give us an insight into the functions that underlie or underpin our behaviors. So I'm going to talk to this now. So the idea is that our brains have evolved over millennia, and they've evolved in ways that have protected us and facilitated our survival in evolutionary contexts. And again, our responses in modern world might not be as adaptive as they would have been perhaps in these evolutionary contexts. So it's important to remember that we have evolved tricky brains, and that it's not our fault the way we respond, that we are wired in particular ways to respond to evolved threats or evolutionary threats. And that the coping strategies we employ to deal with difficult times are natural responses, and all of our behaviors serve a function or a purpose. So they're designed in some way to facilitate our survival and protect us. And I'm going to dive into this in a little bit more detail now. And I'm going to describe the 3 system affect regulation model, which is kind of central to this whole model of compassion. And so this model is a kind of a simplified version that tries to explain how our brain works, in particular, how we are driven, our emotions and our motivations are driven by kind of different systems within our bodies. Or within our minds, should I say. So this system, this model identifies 3 systems: threat, drive, and soothing. And so I'm going to discuss each of these in turn. So the first system is the threat system. And this system is designed to ensure our survival. So its purpose is to identify threats and help protect us from them. So as humans, we are hardwired to respond to threat, and we operate on a better safe than sorry principle. So we would rather respond to false positives. So in an evolutionary context, we would rather overreact to a flash of orange that happened to be a kitten, rather than not react to a flash of orange that happened to be a tiger that could possibly eat us. So we're very sensitive to threats. And this is why we as humans tend to have a negativity bias. So we tend to focus on the negative events more than positive ones. So we could have had a wonderful day and we still hone in on that one little negative thing that happened. It's also why the sting of being reprimanded tends to kind of sit with us more than the joy of being praised. So the threat system is driven by feelings of fear, anger, and disgust. So if we think about it, fear and disgust are kind of emotions that kind of pull us away from a threat, whereas anger kind of moves us towards a threat. And the threat system elicits 3 coping responses to help us manage these threats that we encounter. We have the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so the fight helps us move away from a threat. The fight helps us armor ourselves to take on a threat, flight to move away, and sometimes the freeze is kind of associated with uncertainty and paralysis. And so when the threat system comes online, it's associated with the release of chemicals such as cortisol, which is associated with the stress response, and adrenaline. And again, this can help us prepare to elicit one of these responses. So it increases our heart rate, blood pumps around the body quicker to get to our muscles to allow us to prepare. We become heightened in terms of our sensitivities, etc. So this system helps us manage these threats. Now, the thing is, in an evolutionary context, these kind of responses help us to survive when we were faced with life or death situations. And in the modern world, we experience threats more in terms of social kind of experiences, and yet we respond with the same response. And as humans, our brains are social organs, and we're very sensitive to feelings of, and we all desire to feel valued, to belong, to feel cared for, etc. And shame can be a very strong social regulator. So we are programmed to be always often thinking about what other people think of us, how are we perceived by others. And so shame and self-criticism are kind of core and elements of this threat system, and they can be very uncomfortable emotions. So to give you an example of how this threat system might be in real life, in an actual scenario, and I'm going to use the context of social media and a young person to kind of illustrate this. So we can imagine, for example, a young person posts an image of themselves online, and perhaps it doesn't get the validation that they're looking for. Maybe they don't get the likes or the comments that they're hoping, or even worse, they get negative comments from peers about what they've posted. So this can be associated with feelings of fear. So maybe I'm being rejected by my friends. It can be anger, maybe directed towards themselves. Why did I post that? Or towards others. Why are they commenting? Or why aren't they doing, why aren't they liking my picture? And disgust, and this can often be directed towards oneself. So I'm disgusted at myself. I don't like myself, things like that. So that's the threat system coming online. And again, in terms of the fight, flight, and freeze response, we could have a fight response that a young person lashes out because of this experience. Flight, so they withdraw, pull away, disengage. Or freeze, they just might be caught up in the moment. They don't even know how to respond. They're just frozen, like deer in headlights kind of experience. So this is the threat system. It's designed to help us survive. And again, it's really useful, but when it's overactivated, as it often can be in our modern world, that's when it becomes problematic for us. And again, it's associated with feelings of anxiety, depression, that kind of. The second system that I want to talk to you about then is the drive system. And so this system was designed to help us acquire resources in evolutionary times. So these would include things like food, water, shelter, and these kind of things. Now, in modern contexts, we mostly have our basic needs met if we're lucky. And so the drive system mostly manifests itself in terms of competition over perhaps trying to succeed in work or academia, or trying to climb social ladder or acquire wealth or fame or status, these kind of things. And the drive system is associated with feelings of wanting, pursuing, and achieving. And it's associated with the release of dopamine. And again, this is considered the pleasure chemical in the brain. So it can be really rewarding and a positive feeling to achieve. And there's nothing wrong with striving and achieving, etc. The problem is when our whole self-worth is tied up in that feeling of pursuing. When that happens, it can make us very competitive, it can make us very stressed around performing and achieving, it can make failure very difficult to deal with. And in our modern society, this system is very much online a lot of the time. We're kind of in a society that pressurizes perfection, striving, being only average is not considered good enough. And also in the individualized context in which we live, if we're not achieving our goals, it's nearly only ourselves to blame for that. So our system really puts this system, kind of activates this drive system quite a lot. So an example of this in real world, we can imagine a simple example of a student being in school. And again, they might be striving to achieve good grades. And again, that's a positive thing if they want to do well in school. And perhaps they achieve a grade that they want in an early test, and they get their parents' approval and teacher approval, and it feels good. But then there's the pressure to constantly keep striving and keep performing. And if they fall off a little bit or their performance dips, if their whole self-worth is tied up in this, it can be very difficult to bounce back from that. And I can relate to this kind of drive system myself. In my own undergraduate degree in my final year, I was striving to do really well. I put a huge amount of pressure on myself to get good grades. And initially, when my essays came back at the start of the year and my grades were low or not as what I expected, I put a huge amount of pressure on myself to improve, to strive, to keep going, work harder, work longer hours, etc. And that kind of led to me being awake at night thinking, I'm not doing enough, I need to work harder. That led to me being tired during the day because I'd been awake thinking about this all night. I was sluggish, I wasn't as effective getting through my work. And then I'd be awake at night, stressing that I didn't get enough done through the day because I was tired, and yet I'm still awake and this is still going through my mind. So this drive system, when it's overactivated, can be counterproductive. It is useful, it helps us achieve and strive and do well, but when it becomes overactive, that can be problematic. And the final system I want to talk to you about is the soothing system. So the purpose of the soothing system is to promote friendship, bonding, relationships. It's typically associated with the release of oxytocin, which is considered the love or the bonding hormone. And this hormone helps us to make those friendships and affiliations. And it's also associated with generating feelings of calm, contentness, safeness, connectedness. Oxytocin can also counteract the cortisol stress response, so it can actually balance and calm that system down. And the soothing system is actually unique to mammals, and it kind of originates from the idea that it kind of from the mother-child interaction in infancy. And so if we think about a child when they're distressed, a parent ideally will try and meet that child's needs, whether it be giving them food, reassuring them, talking to them soothingly, rocking them back and forward. And if we think about us as humans, as we grow up, we still want to have our needs met. We still want to be loved, accepted, cared for, feel like we belong. And so the soothing system is actually really important throughout our lives. And this is why having social support in times of difficulty and distress can be so helpful for people. It provides that sense of connectedness and safety and warmth. And the idea of self-compassion is that you can generate these feelings of soothing, calmness, warmth yourself and direct them towards yourself to help you manage your emotions. So I just want to pause there and ask you just to think about, in the last week, how much time did you spend in either of the systems, threat, drive, or soothing? So if you have a napkin near you and you want to just draw a circle to represent the amount of time you spent in each system, with a bigger circle indicating greater time spent. And again, if you don't have a pen paper to hand, just think about it for a moment. Did you spend more time in threat, drive, or soothing? So typically when this example or this reflection is done, most people tend to report that they spend a lot of time in threat or in drive, and they tend to spend less time in soothing. And so soothing can actually calm down the threat and drive responses. So it can actually reduce stress. And so the aim of self-compassion is to strive for a balance between these three systems. And this balance can be achieved by increasing activation in the soothing system to dampen down the activation in drive and threat, and thereby achieving a balance. So how do we activate that soothing system in our brain? And one of the things that, surprise, surprise, can elicit that kind of calm response is practicing self-compassion. Self-compassion is actually a skill that can be learned and developed. And I'll come on to this a little bit more, but our default tends to be self-critical, but we can consciously reframe this and we can learn self-compassion as a skill that we can develop. There are several ways that you can calm the mind and elicit that soothing response. And I'm going to talk about three main ones. So mindfulness, managing critical self-talk, and building compassionate qualities. So mindfulness, a bit of a buzzword, and I'm sure you probably all have come across it, but mindfulness is an awareness of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment without interpretation or judgment. So it's the ability to be in the here and now, and to be kind of aware of your thoughts. And I think a lot of the time we find ourselves mind wandering or time traveling. So we're either in the future thinking about what we need to do next, or we're in the past kind of going over what we should have done before. And so sometimes we are very often we can find ourselves that we're not right in the here and now. And so it's very easy just to bring your attention to the here and now in your daily activities, even while you're doing the spuds or cooking the dinner or whatever it is, that you can just catch yourself if you find yourself time traveling to the future, the past, and bring yourself to the activity that you're doing in the present moment. Again, you don't have to be a Buddha or a Zen, or you don't have to sit for hours to achieve mindfulness as a practice. Again, mindfulness is something that I think is very personal. Some people find it very useful, and I'm going to just detail why that might be the case. But for others, it doesn't work, and that's fine if it's not for you. But the idea of other ways that we can get into mindfulness is through breathing. So again, if you think about it, if you can slow down your breath, you can slow down your heart rate, then calm down your body and calm down your mind. And I think we've nearly all of us have heard that kind of suggestion that if we're nervous or before we're going for an important event, that you take deep breath before you go in. And there's a reason for that. It does calm the body's response. And I know myself, before I came on this talk, I was quite nervous, and I took my deep breaths to try and calm myself before starting out. Another way to get into mindfulness is through visualization, so imagining things that are calming or soothing, or through grounding. So even just bringing your attention to your senses. What do you smell, hear, touch, taste in the area that's around you? Just bringing your present moment. And it's just moments of mindfulness that you can incorporate throughout your day that can help just bring that sense of calm and peace. And again, building this up over time helps you when going gets tough to kind of put these practices of mindfulness into place. We can also think of mindfulness as kind of directing our attention. So if we think of our attention as a spotlight, and if we shine a spotlight on something, we can see what the light is shining on, and everything else around kind of fades into the distance. We don't really notice it that much. And if we think of our attention in a similar way, so we can direct our attention to particular things, and what we pay attention to tends to guide our thoughts and behaviors. So by directing our attention, we can become more aware of our thoughts and feelings. And again, this empowers us to take action to make change if we so wish. So we could choose if we want to, like if we find ourselves that our mind and our attention is directed only on those negative thoughts, maybe something that might be helpful is, can we change our attentional spotlight? Can we focus on more positive things or things that we might be grateful for, rather, because if we just thinking about the negatives, that's going to be the thing that guides our thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So can we shift that spotlight of attention to things that might be helpful for us? So that's kind of the mindfulness aspect. I'm now going to talk to critical self-talk, and this is something that I found really useful. And it's an awareness of that dialogue that we feed ourselves. And self-criticism, despite being socially sanctioned, can often be counterproductive and unhelpful. And oftentimes we don't even notice our self-criticism because it's just part of our thought processes. But here's some critical thoughts. So things like, you're getting fat. Who do you think you are? You'll never make it. You aren't good enough. And I'd ask you, would you ever say these things to your friend? And I'm sure for the most of you, it would be absolutely not, would not dream of saying this to somebody else. But I ask then, would you say these things to yourself? The likelihood is that maybe, probably, I know I've said these things to myself. So the penny drop here is that we're often so harsh and critical on ourselves in ways that we would never be to someone else. So this self-critic, that voice in our heads, or that kind of thought process in our heads, is really good at conjuring up worst case scenarios in the future. So it often tends to exaggerate how bad things would be, so catastrophizing. or tends to focus on this unchangeable past. We ruminate on things we should have done, or if only. And these kind of patterns of thinking sometimes keep us stuck in where we are. And so we can't really progress from all of these if we're kind of just stuck in this. So if self-criticism is so counterproductive, the question might be then, why do we criticize ourselves? And so I just ask you to think about a time when you were critical of yourself, and just ask or think about, what was the self-critic actually trying to achieve? So for many of us, I think the answer to that would be that the self-critic was somehow trying to help you achieve your goals. It was trying to help you avoid making mistakes or trying to ensure you did better. And we can think of self-criticism as an evolutionary survival mechanism that's designed to help us feel safe. But sometimes it's going about helping us in the wrong way. So in ways it's misguided, and this kind of misguidedness can be counterproductive and upsetting for us. Another way of thinking of this is, if you had to choose a team for yourself or your child to be on, would you choose team A, where the coach is screaming and shouting from the sideline and berating the children, and every mistake, every flaw is highlighted and exaggerated and punished? Or team B, where there's encouraging, there's support. If a child makes a mistake, there's an effort to identify how we can improve, make things better for the future. So which team would you choose? I'd say, or hazard a guess, that most people would choose team B. And it's likely that both of these teams are trying to achieve the same thing, and they might both achieve the same goals, but the subjective feeling of being on team A and team B is hugely different. And I think this quote by Kristen Neff really sums this up. If you really want to motivate yourself, love is more powerful than fear. So now I'm going to talk about some compassionate qualities that we can build. And compassionate mind training seeks to build a kind of a compassionate mindset through thinking and reasoning and sensation and all of these various aspects. And I want to focus today on language and just honing into that language of self-compassion versus the self-critic. So self-criticism is undermining, intolerant, backward-looking. It tends to exaggerate mistakes and think the worst possible outcomes, and it ruminates on the past. In contrast, compassion is supportive, understanding, and forward-looking. It's realistic about mistakes and looks to the future and tries to identify ways that you can improve. So in terms of dialogues that you can use, if you notice yourself or your child or your young person using these kind of critical voices, these are just some ways that we can reframe that. So for example, you're a screw up, you're a burden on others. You can change that to be more compassionate in terms of recognizing that everyone makes mistakes and it's natural to be upset. Or you're not good enough. Well, you're doing the best you can in the present moment. Or you're a failure. Well, you're learning from your experiences and you'll do better in the future. I'm just going to share with you a story which I think encapsulates what I've just been talking about in terms of the self-critical and self-compassion dialogue. I'm going to act it out, so apologies for my acting skills, but here we go. I feel sick, said the voice from the bedroom. You're not sick. Get up and get ready, called the mother, walking up the stairs and hovering outside the bedroom door. I'm not going to school. I hate school, said the voice from the bedroom. I'm always getting things wrong and making mistakes and getting told off. Nobody likes me and I've got no friends and we've too many tests and they're all too confusing. It's just pointless. I'm not going to school ever again. I'm sorry, but you're going to school, said the mother through the door, and she continued encouragingly. Really, mistakes are how we learn and develop, and please try not to take criticism so personally. And I can't believe nobody likes you. You've lots of friends at school. And yes, all those tests can be confusing, but we're all tested in many ways throughout our lives. And all of this experience in school is useful for life in general. And besides, you have to go. You're the head teacher. So this story illustrates that compassion is for everyone. We all need a bit of compassion to help us through kind of difficult times. Just moving on to thinking about compassion, if there's another way to kind of help build this kind of compassionate self, can be to imagine someone that you think of as being compassionate or empathetic and how they manage a difficult situation, and how you could potentially cultivate those qualities or use those skills yourself in that situation. Now I'm going to move on to looking at how you can cultivate self-compassion for your young person. And I'd like to just start by just identifying that self-compassion can be quite difficult for adolescents because of the developmental stage in which they're at. So adolescence is actually a peak time for self-criticism. In adolescence, there can be this kind of tendency towards ecocentrism. So this means that kind of an adolescent is focused on themselves. A lot of the time they feel like there's an imagined audience, that everyone is watching them. And so they can feel quite self-conscious and highly judged. And this can lead to black and white thinking, so all or nothing, and can be quite reactive to certain contexts. So just to have a consideration for these when you're trying to build compassion for your young person. And I'm going to just talk now for the last few slides on how you can use these principles of self-compassion to support your young person. And the first thing I would suggest is to try and see what sits behind your child's behavior. So thinking back to that evolved brain and recognizing that we do have tricky brains, and that there is a function that's underpinning our behavior. It's trying to make us feel safe. And so if your young person is lashing out, there's probably a function for that behavior. And so the idea is to slow down and try and just recognize that this is just a part of being a human, and that we didn't choose to respond in this way. And it can also be flipped to yourself as a parent or a teacher. I mean, you don't wake up in the morning and want to scream and shout, but if your buttons are pushed and you feel angry, sometimes we find ourselves lashing out. And again, it's just that recognition that that's not our fault, and that's how our brains respond in these situations. And just having that awareness can help us kind of adjust and change our responses. A second thing that can be useful is to monitor your own self-critical dialogue. So a lot of the time, parents and teachers can indicate difficulties with failure, criticism, shame, guilt concerning their perceived parenting mistakes. So just check in and become aware of your own self-talk, and can you flip the conversation in your own mind to something that is less self-critical? Because this is important, because your beliefs can influence their beliefs. So they can pick up on the kind of dialogues that you talk to yourself and adopt them themselves. So can you switch that? And within this, just noticing your own body language, facial expression and tone, they can be quite indicative of self-dialogue. Relatedly, just modeling a compassionate mindset for your child. So recognizing perhaps self-critical dialogues when they arise in your young person. So, and maybe challenging those kind of critical dialogues. So I'm the worst in the world, but is that really true? Or trying to kind of facilitate or model a different way. So if your young person comes to you and says, oh, I'm a failure, can you flip that and make it, well, maybe I recognize this is hard, but can we see something that we can learn from this? Or is there something that can help us grow in the future? So it's just kind of trying to think of those kind of ways that you can model this, and think about flexible thinking. So trying to kind of encourage different ways of thinking rather than the black and white, and kind of opening up maybe alternatives. Another thing is to encourage your child to just take those deep breaths to calm themselves down when they're stressed, things like that. And then, yeah, applying the principles like self-compassion or self-kindness, mindfulness, common humanity, and just bearing those in mind. It's just important to remember that when you're a young person, or when I think we've all experienced this, when we're kind of highly emotionally charged, it's very difficult to think rationally and to kind of be reasoned in what we're thinking. And so it's often helpful to go to someone who can take that step back, who is grounded and relaxed. So as you as a parent, providing that safe space and that calm environment for a young person to kind of share their thoughts and feelings and think out things in a more rational way can be helpful. This is kind of this idea of providing a safe space for a young person to discuss their concerns is really important. Actively listening to the young person's concerns without judgment is really key. And this can involve just opening up curious, inquisitive conversations. So this can be or can involve like things like, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, oh, that must be really hard for you. Or thinking about what might be helpful for you right now. What can also be helpful is trying to paraphrase or rephrase something that a young person has said to you and allow them to hear it back. So a lot of the time we live in our heads, and it can be so helpful when we say things out and when we hear what we said kind of reflected back to us. It helps us process. So again, the idea is just to be that empathetic listening ear. And so this doesn't involve kind of jumping in with your own experience or trying to fix the problem. And I think that's key. Sometimes you can't fix the problem, and really all that the young person is looking for is to be heard and to be listened to. And I think a key message from the discussion last week from Tony Bates, he said it was one of his key learnings in the area of supporting youth mental health, is that young people don't want to be helped, they want to be heard. So trying to be that empathetic listening ear is just so important. The sounding board really for your young person's concerns. And also relatedly, just avoiding blame and shame. So let's say your young person comes home and they maybe not done well on a test or something. So saying, oh God, you should have done better, or pull up those socks, or you didn't study hard enough, or these kind of blaming feelings don't really help. A lot of the time that blame on shame can kind of create resentment. So just again, being aware that shame is a difficult emotion, it doesn't often help to load more blame or shame on top of that. And also just, yeah. Yeah. And then finally, recognizing that this is a challenging time for you, stressful to be a parent or a teacher, and recognizing that you're doing the very best that you can. And so giving compassion to yourself can help you be in a better position to support your young person. So the idea is kind of like putting on your own air mask before helping others. And the added benefit is that giving you the resources, it gives you the resources and the capabilities to manage in a difficult time. So just to summarize, this is kind of a brief toolkit of self-compassion principles that you can use to help support your young person and yourself. The first thing is just recognizing that we have tricky brains, that we have evolved brains that have particular functions, and just to recognize that and try and identify what might be sitting behind the behavior. As a parent or teacher, just being aware of your own self-critical dialogue, and is it something that you can model differently for your young person in terms of being kind of aware of developing a more compassionate dialogue, and also just modeling a compassionate mindset for your child, whether this be through kind of challenging the self-criticism, or just kind of imparting those principles. And then the most key thing here is that providing a safe space to discuss concerns, that open, empathetic listening ear. And finally, just applying those principles of self-compassion to yourself. Again, so important to help you and your young person. But the overarching theme of self-compassion approaches is this idea of soothing, providing care. And if we think about this, you as parents and teachers are kind of designed to do this. You're built to soothe and provide this caregiving response. And this is just about being a bit more aware and activating that compassionate voice a little bit more. And that's something that's well within the capacity of all of you. So that is me this evening. Thank you so much for your attention and for attending this evening. I've linked some resources that may be of benefit to you if you want to follow up. So some books, websites, and kind of YouTube videos. And that's me for this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ciara. That was a really interesting and informative talk. And I imagine there probably is loads of questions now for you. Just before we start the questions, I just want to share this slide again, just to remind any parents, this is our last series of talks on supporting young people's well-being. And the reason we've done this is because of the Parent study. So it's a study looking at both parents and young people's mental health literacy. We still really need some fathers and particularly young people to complete the study. So we'd really appreciate if you could take the time. You're able to scan the code that's on the slide here, and also the link to the study will be shared in the chat as well. So I can see some questions coming in, so I might start with the questions. First one, Ciara, what do you do when the person in distress is refusing to have self-compassion and is completely negative about it?
Yeah, so that is a key challenge of these self-compassion approaches, and there's a huge amount of focus on it, particularly in kind of, sometimes people can be very hesitant to engage in self-compassion for a number of reasons. And again, there's barriers about the perceptions of what self-compassion might mean. Sometimes we feel that if we let go of the self-critic, that we won't be able to achieve what we want. And again, when we're dealing with young people, again, it's normal to expect, I suppose, ambivalence maybe, or even resistance, or non-interest in kind of trying to change this mindset. So it is challenging. I suppose the important thing here is that if it is a thing about trying to address the barriers, like things like recognizing that you don't need to just be self-critical to achieve your goals, or that you are worthy of compassion, even if you don't think you are, everyone is worthy of it. And it's something that I think it has to be coming from within. Like, you can encourage and show you're compassionate for the person, that you're there for them, and then it's a choice for the person themselves. And I know that's difficult, but I think with anything, it has to be a decision that comes from the person. And I suppose it's just being there and supportive and encouraging as much as you can within that. But I recognize that it is tricky.
Hi, Ciara. Yeah, just another question that came in there. I think you addressed it quite a bit already. But she's just wondering about if there's anything else you could say about kind of how a parent can help the child move their thinking from quite self-critical to more self-compassionate, if there's anything else you want to say on that.
Yeah, I suppose it's just trying to have that awareness of the dialogue. I think for me personally, I was never aware how critical I was of myself until I actually studied this for my PhD. So it's just trying to actually open up that awareness. And so when you're kind of having those conversations with your child, picking up on those kind of critical things, like, gosh, that sounds like you're being really harsh on yourself. So just raising that awareness. And then again, kind of those bits around trying to model more compassionate dialogue, and also just trying to reframe. So maybe another way to think about it would be this, or kind of, yeah, trying to reframe or shift the conversation or the way that someone views themselves, or that self-critical dialogue.
Right, yeah. And it's actually so interesting to hear all this as well. You know, it's so helpful. And the other question we have is, what's the best way to get out of the freeze response for yourself or for the people that you're trying to help, for the young person?
I suppose, so the freeze response is kind of, yeah, it's when the threat response is activated. So again, trying to activate that soothing system to counteract the threat response can help. Again, these kind of, once the threat is passed, usually these kind of responses alleviate, because they've helped you get out of the threat or whatever it is. But again, it's kind of activating that soothing system can decrease the levels of cortisol, adrenaline that are associated with the threat responses. And so if you can think to breathe, maybe that can help kind of get out of that, just being so kind of trapped, just taking those slow breaths, and those kind of things can help. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the comments are just about how great the talk is. So
Very kind.
And then just one more about maybe how can you support a person who feels they're underperforming in competitive situations and is self-critical in those situations, they feel they're going to fail.
That's a really tricky one. And I think that is kind of a crux of a lot of it. We use the self-critic as a motivator to help us push on, get better, etc. And so it kind of fuels that competitive aspect. And so self-criticism in itself is not all bad, like, but it's the problem when it becomes the overarching theme, and when it becomes failure is so hard to accept, and when it kind of helps, it doesn't help motivate you to move forward. It kind of just gets you stuck in that feeling of failure. And so here in this situation, it's a difficult realization, but maybe I love this. I can't remember who said it, but you've tried self-criticism for a period of time and it hasn't worked. Maybe try compassion instead. I've misquoted that, but it is just maybe just open up, give it a go, try an experiment. And yeah, maybe it might not work for you, but maybe you could just try it and see as an approach. And again, I just should caveat, like, compassion is not a cure-all or the panacea for everything, but it can help, particularly when we are kind of highly self-critical. And I know I fall into that category of being critical, and I have to pull myself up on it. So yeah, it's developing that awareness and trying to maybe test out a different way of thinking.
Thank you so much, Ciara. I definitely think myself I'll be trying to practice some self-compassion after listening to the tips from your talk. So that's the end of our webinar series. I'd like to thank everyone who's attended for the past 4 webinars, and if you've missed them, you can find them on our Youth Mental Health Lab website. And I just want to say a massive thank you to Ciara for her talk tonight, but also the team who have been behind me for these talks. So Ciara, Anya French, Maeve Dwayne O'Reilly, and Professor Eilis Hennessy. So thank you everyone for attending.